The topic of our first lecture in COM 412 is going to focus on the social construction of gender, or how gender functions as a social construct. But before we can understand how gender is something that's socially constructed, we need to have a nuts and bolts understanding of what social construction theory is. So to do this first, we need to understand that there's a distinction between signs and symbols. Signs and symbols are not synonyms for one another. A sign is when there is a direct relationship between two phenomena. For instance, if you smell smoke in your house or you see smoke, you're going to assume that a fire is present in your home because there is a direct relationship between smoke and fire. Regardless of whether or not humans were present, smoke would be around fire. Now, a symbol is different because a symbol refers to an indirect, arbitrary relationship that humans construct between two or more phenomena. It's how we symbolize our world. For instance, in literature, a lot of times, fire is used by authors to represent conflict. But it's not like a sign because there's not a direct relationship between fire and conflict. For instance, if you argue with one of your friends, the furniture around you doesn't combust into flames. Instead, the metaphorical relationship that humans have constructed between fire and conflict is just one way that they symbolize their world, or metaphorically render it. So, social construction focuses with the world of symbols, or symbolic communication. And social constructivists ask a very basic question. How do humans co-create, institutionalize, and maintain a shared meaning? For instance, in the United States, we value patriotism. But what does patriotism mean? Well, we have a bunch of narratives that detail different accounts of U.S. history that give us a sense of what patriotism is. Patriotism is serving your country. It's being willing to die for your country. All of these narratives working together that all school children in the context of the United States learn about help us create a shared meaning of patriotism, right? So it's not completely subjective, rather it's intersubjective. Next, meaning is shaped by socio-historical location. So meanings are culturally relative. Not everything has the same meaning in all cultures. For instance, my father was born in 1920, and his understanding of gender relationships was vastly different than mine. I was born in the 1970s. So when I would go out to restaurants with my father and he would call waitresses things like, "Hey, honey," or "Hey, toots, can I get this?" it always made my face turn completely red. I couldn't believe that my father would greet a waitress in that way, but he was a product of a different time and a different place. So when we talk about socio-historical location constraining and enabling meaning, we're talking about the time and place in which one is embedded. Many of the things that we assume are natural are actually cultural constructs. So you'll see whenever people are having fierce debates about things like marriage or gender relationships, they treat these human-constructed institutions as if this is just the natural way things are done. Like a number of people will claim, well, this is the right way to do marriage, and it's just always been this way. Well, no, in fact, it hasn't always been this way. Marriage is a cultural construct that changes from time to time and changes from culture to culture, and the same thing with gender. So social construction relies on processes of socialization, where individuals learn and internalize customs, habits, and values. In other words, when babies are born, they're not born with this innate ability to understand what the rules of a particular culture are. Instead, they have to learn the rules of the culture by breaking customs, breaking habits, and then being rewarded or punished for specific behaviors in which they engage. And this is known as their processes of socialization. And there are a number of different institutions in our day-to-day life that help socialize us. In the world of social construction theory, socialization is split into three primary categories. The first category is primary socialization. The second, according to Berger and Luckman, is secondary socialization. And then the final category is reality maintenance. So we'll discuss each of these levels of socialization in more detail, beginning with primary socialization. Social constructivist theorists argue that primary socialization occurs in early childhood. And this is when children learn the very basic rules of society. And they tend to learn these rules from their caregivers. They will, a caregiver, if they see a child doing something that the child shouldn't do, will say, don't. They might work to shame the child. They want to teach the child that this is basic and appropriate behavior. So, for instance, there comes an age where a little boy or a little girl can't just run around public in the nude, no matter what the context is. There's always that age where it's like, oh, honey, no, you really need to go put, a diaper on or put some clothes on. I remember when I was a kid, my father was both mother and father to me. He was the one who raised me. And I would always run around the house with no pants on up until the time I was like 4 years old, until my brothers and sisters, who were a bit older than me, would say, you can't do that. That's so embarrassing. So I learned the basics of my socialization, that I should feel nude. Whenever I'm nude, I should feel a sense of shame. After we learn the very basic rules, and by basic rules, I mean it's not complex at all. We're just getting a very basic understanding of how the world works. Then we move into processes of secondary socialization. And secondary socialization occurs from childhood through adolescence. And this is when somebody learns more role-specific knowledge. They get more nuanced